Michael Sterling's hands gripped the steering wheel as his phone buzzed relentlessly on the passenger seat. The corporate boardroom he'd fled 20 minutes ago felt like another lifetime, but Daniel's words still echoed in his mind. The Chinese investors are ready to close. Your signature transfers everything, Michael. Fight me, and I'll destroy you. His half-brother had orchestrated the perfect trap. 5 years of careful planning, documented every decision Michael made, every risk he took, every moment of supposed mismanagement. The board would vote Daniel as CEO within a week unless Michael found a way to stop the hostile takeover from the inside. The windshield wipers fought against the thickening snow as Highway 191 stretched endlessly ahead. Michael had driven this route countless times during college, escaping to the mountains when the pressure of inheriting Sterling Corp became suffocating. Tonight, he needed that escape more than ever. His phone rang again. Same unknown number that had been calling since he left Billings. Probably Daniel's lawyers, ready to serve papers. Michael hit decline and pressed harder on the accelerator. The GPS indicated 15 miles to the Turner Creek exit when the deer appeared in his headlights. Michael yanked the wheel left, tires losing traction on the icy asphalt. The Mercedes spun twice before slamming into the guardrail, metal screaming against metal as it flipped down the embankment. Emma Parker was checking the fence line when she heard the crash. Thunder had been rumbling all evening, but this sound was different. Sharp, metallic, wrong. She urged her horse toward the highway, flashlight cutting through the swirling snow. The headlights below the road surface told her everything she needed to know. Emma dismounted and scrambled down the slope, her emergency medical training kicking in before conscious thought. The driver was unconscious, blood trickling from a gash above his left temple. Male, early 30s, expensive suit torn from the impact. His breathing was steady but shallow. Emma checked his pulse, examined his pupils with her flashlight, and ran practiced hands along his neck and spine. No obvious breaks, but he needed immediate medical attention. Her truck was parked a quarter-mile away. Emma couldn't risk moving him alone, but the nearest hospital was 40 minutes in good weather. In this storm, with the roads icing over, it might as well be on the moon. She made the decision that would change everything. 20 minutes later, Michael Sterling opened his eyes in Emma Parker's guest bedroom, though neither of them knew yet how their lives had intertwined 5 years ago. Emma sat in the corner chair, monitoring his vitals like she would any injured animal brought to the sanctuary. "Easy there," she said when he tried to sit up. "You took a pretty hard hit. I'm Emma Parker. You're at my ranch." Michael's vision focused slowly. The woman looked to be in her late 20s, auburn hair pulled back, work clothes that suggested she was comfortable with emergencies. Her direct gaze held no sympathy, just professional assessment. "The storm's getting worse," Emma continued. "Roads are closed until morning. I called 911, but emergency services can't get through either. You're stuck here until the snow clears." Michael raised his hand to the bandage on his forehead. "My car, totaled. You're lucky to be alive." He tried to piece together the last few hours. The meeting, Daniel's ultimatum, the drive. Everything after the deer was a blank. "I need to make some calls," Michael said, attempting to stand. The room tilted dangerously. "You need to rest. Possible concussion." Emma's tone brooked no argument. "What's your name? I should contact someone to let them know you're okay." "Michael Sterling." Emma's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Her professional demeanor stayed intact, but something cold flickered behind her eyes. "Sterling," she repeated slowly. "As in Sterling Corp. You know the company?" Emma set down her coffee mug with deliberate control. 5 years of buried anger threatened to surface, but she kept her voice level. "I know the company very well, Mr. Sterling. Your people destroyed my family's veterinary clinic in New York. Hostile takeover. Closed us down and sold the building to developers." Michael stared at her. Sterling Corp acquired dozens of properties every year, but he personally approved every major transaction. He would have remembered a veterinary clinic. "That's impossible. I oversee all acquisitions personally." "Parker Veterinary Clinic. Upper West Side. Your brother Daniel signed the papers himself." The name hit Michael like a physical blow. He did remember now, not the clinic itself, but Daniel mentioning a small acquisition in New York that would clear some real estate complications. Michael had been dealing with a major merger in Seattle at the time and had trusted Daniel to handle the minor details. "I didn't know," Michael said quietly. Emma stood up, her movements sharp with controlled fury. You didn't know? Right. The CEO of Sterling Corp just happened to be unaware that his company destroyed a family business that had been serving the community for 30 years. Daniel handled that transaction. I was focused on the Morrison merger. I never saw the details. How convenient. Emma moved toward the door. There's soup on the stove if you're hungry. Don't try to leave tonight. The roads are impassable and you're in no condition to drive anyway. She paused at the threshold, looking back at the man who represented everything she'd lost. Mr. Sterling, you might want to think about what other details your brother handles while you're focused elsewhere. Some of us live with the consequences of your family's business decisions every single day. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Michael alone with the weight of a revelation that made Daniel's corporate coup attempt seem like the least of his problems. Emma slammed the kitchen door harder than necessary. The soup pot rattled on the stove, but she barely noticed. 5 years of suppressed rage coursed through her veins as she paced the small kitchen. Michael Sterling, the CEO himself, lying in her guest room, claiming ignorance about the clinic that had been her family's legacy for 3 decades. She grabbed her laptop from the counter and pulled up the saved folder she'd kept all these years. Every document, every email, every legal notice from the acquisition. Her father had insisted on keeping everything, saying someday they'd need proof of what Sterling Corp had done to them. The acquisition notice was dated March 15, 2020. Daniel Sterling's signature sprawled across the bottom, authorizing the purchase of Parker Veterinary Clinic for development purposes. The building had been demolished 6 months later to make room for luxury condos. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to find Michael standing in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame for support. He'd changed out of his torn suit into clothes she'd left from her father's closet. The flannel shirt hung loose on his frame, making him look less like a corporate shark and more like the injured man she'd rescued. I said you needed to rest. I needed to see the documents. Michael's voice was steady despite the obvious effort it took him to remain upright. If my company destroyed your family's business, I need to understand how. Emma turned the laptop screen toward him. Knock yourself out. Michael lowered himself carefully into the opposite chair, studying the acquisition notice. His brow furrowed as he read through the details. This doesn't make sense. The purchase price is 40% below market value for that area. And the justification. He scrolled down, reading the attached report. This says your clinic was operating at a loss, facing multiple health code violations. All lies. The health inspector's report shows serious violations dating back 18 months. Emma leaned forward, her voice tight with controlled anger. Violations that didn't exist until Sterling Corp decided they wanted our building. Suddenly, we had inspectors showing up weekly, finding problems that had never existed before. My father spent $60,000 fixing violations that kept multiplying like cancer. Michael continued reading, his expression growing more troubled with each document. These inspector signatures. I recognize this name. Gerald Hutchins. He was caught taking bribes from developers in 2021. The scandal made national news. Too bad that was a year too late for us. Michael's fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up another screen. The development company that bought your property after the demolition. Meridian Holdings. They're a Sterling Corp subsidiary, but... He paused, studying the corporate structure. This subsidiary reports directly to Daniel. I've never seen these transactions. Emma watched his face carefully. Either Michael Sterling was an incredible actor, or his shock was genuine. She'd expected arrogance, dismissive justifications, maybe an offer to write a check to make the problem disappear. She hadn't expected this methodical examination of evidence or the growing anger in his expression. Your brother apparently handles a lot of details without your knowledge. Daniel manages our real estate acquisitions, but he's supposed to report all transactions over $5 million. This building and the development project together were worth at least $20 million. Michael closed the laptop and looked directly at Emma. I can't undo what happened to your family, but I can promise you this wasn't done with my knowledge or approval. Promises from a Sterling don't mean much to me. Fair enough. Michael started to stand, swayed slightly, and sat back down. But whether you believe me or not, someone used my company to commit fraud. That affects both of us. Emma found herself studying his face despite her determination to maintain her anger. The The man sitting in her kitchen didn't match her mental image of the ruthless CEO who'd authorized her family's destruction. This Michael Sterling looked tired, frustrated, and genuinely disturbed by what he'd discovered. Why does it matter to you now? The clinic's gone. My family lost everything. What difference does it make if you knew or not? Because if Daniel did this without authorization, he's done it before. And if he's been running unauthorized operations through Sterling Corp. Michael rubbed his temples. It explains a lot about tonight. Tonight, Michael hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. I was fleeing a board meeting where Daniel announced a hostile takeover. Chinese investors, corporate restructuring, my removal as CEO. I thought he was just ambitious. But if he's been building a shadow empire within my own company. Emma refilled her coffee mug, processing this information. So you're saying we're both victims of your brother's schemes? I'm saying Daniel Sterling has been playing a longer game than either of us realized. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Emma glanced at the weather app on her phone. The storm wouldn't clear until tomorrow afternoon at the earliest. She was stuck with Michael Sterling for at least another 18 hours. The roads won't be passable until late tomorrow, she said finally. You can stay in the guest room. But I want something clear between us, Mr. Sterling. I don't care about your corporate politics or your family drama. I care about my animals and keeping this sanctuary running. Don't mistake my hospitality for forgiveness. Michael nodded slowly. Understood. But Emma, can I ask you something? She raised an eyebrow at his use of her first name. Why did you save me tonight? If you hate Sterling Corp as much as you obviously do, why risk yourself to help me? Emma considered the question. She could have said it was basic human decency, or professional medical instinct, or simple Christian charity. All of those would have been true, but the real answer was more complicated. Because, she said finally, the animals I rescue don't get to choose their circumstances either. They just deserve a chance to survive. Something shifted in Michael's expression. Not gratitude exactly, but a recognition that ran deeper than words. Thank you, he said quietly. Emma turned away before she could examine why his simple thanks affected her more than she wanted to admit. Outside, the storm continued to rage, trapping them together in a space too small for the history between their families and too charged with an attraction neither of them was ready to acknowledge. Emma woke before dawn to the sound of distressed bleating from the barn. She pulled on her boots and grabbed her medical kit, muscle memory guiding her through the pre-dawn routine she'd followed for 5 years. The storm had passed, leaving 3 feet of fresh snow and crystal-clear skies that promised a brutal cold snap. The pregnant ewe was in labor, but something was wrong. Emma knelt beside her, running experienced hands over the animal's swollen sides. The lamb was breached, and without intervention, both mother and baby would die. She was preparing the birthing equipment when footsteps crunched through the snow behind her. Need help? Emma turned to find Michael standing in the barn doorway, fully dressed despite the early hour. He'd found her father's work coat somewhere, and it fit him better than the flannel shirt had. You should be resting. Possible concussion, remember? I've had enough concussions playing college football to know the difference between serious and inconvenient. This one's inconvenient. Michael approached the ewe cautiously. What's wrong with her? Breached birth. I need to turn the lamb manually, but I'll need someone to hold her steady. Michael knelt without hesitation, positioning himself at the ewe's head. His movements were confident, practiced, not the fumbling of a city executive encountering farm animals for the first time. You've done this before. My grandfather had a ranch in Wyoming. I spent every summer there until I was 18. Michael's hands were gentle as he spoke quietly to the distressed animal. After that, Sterling Corp consumed my summers too. Emma worked in silence, focusing on the delicate procedure. Michael anticipated her needs, adjusting his grip, shifting position to give her better access, never flinching at the blood or the animal's distress. When the lamb finally emerged, wet and gasping, he helped clear its airways with the same steady competence he'd shown throughout the delivery. There you go, Mama, Michael murmured as the ewe began cleaning her newborn. Beautiful baby girl. Emma sat back on her heels, studying the man beside her. The corporate shark from last night had disappeared, replaced by someone who clearly understood animals in a way that couldn't be faked. Your grandfather taught you well. He taught me a lot of things. Most of them I had to forget to run Sterling Corporation. Michael wiped his hands on a towel, his expression distant. He always said animals were more honest than people. They don't lie about their intentions. Emma found herself reassessing everything she thought she knew about Michael Sterling. The man who'd just helped deliver a lamb with such obvious love for the work didn't match her image of the ruthless CEO who'd authorized her family's destruction. Why didn't you stay in Wyoming? Because my father died when I was 22, and someone had to run the company. Daniel was only 19, fresh out of prep school, and more interested in spending money than making it. The board made it clear that if I didn't step up, they'd sell Sterling Corp to the highest bidder. Michael's phone rang, interrupting the moment. He glanced at the screen and frowned. My assistant. I should take this. Emma nodded and returned her attention to the ewe and lamb, but she couldn't help overhearing Michael's side of the conversation as he stepped toward the barn door. Sarah, what's the situation? What do you mean emergency board meeting? He can't call a meeting without me. When? Damn it, that's not legal. No, don't try to delay anything. Just document everything he says and does. Yes, I'm fine. Car accident, but I'm okay. I'll be back as soon as the road's clear. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. Just buy me time. Emma's stomach tightened as she listened. Emergency board meeting. Legal maneuvers. The conversation sounded exactly like what she'd expect from a CEO orchestrating some corporate takeover, not a victim of his brother's schemes. Michael ended the call and stood staring at his phone for a long moment. When he turned back to Emma, his expression was grim. Daniel called an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. He's telling them I've had a breakdown, that I'm unfit to continue as CEO. The Chinese investors are flying in from Hong Kong. Convenient timing for your car accident. You think I staged this? Michael's voice carried genuine surprise. Emma, I nearly died last night. I think you're a very smart man who understands the value of creating alibis. Emma stood, putting distance between them. Maybe you needed to be somewhere else when this meeting happened. Maybe having a witness to your innocent recovery from a tragic accident serves your purposes. That's paranoid, even for someone who hates my family. Is it? You show up on my property during a convenient storm, just hours before a crucial board meeting you somehow knew was coming. You play the injured victim, the reformed CEO who had no idea his company was corrupt. And now you're making calls about legal strategies and documentation. Michael took a step toward her, his jaw tight with frustration. You think I orchestrated a car accident that could have killed me just to gain your sympathy? Why would your opinion matter to me? Because I'm a witness. Because you needed someone with a documented grudge against your company to testify about your character, your love of animals, your shock at discovering your brother's crimes. Emma's voice gained strength as the theory crystallized. What better way to prove your innocence than having one of your brother's victims vouch for you? Michael stared at her for a long moment. Around them, the barn animals went about their morning routines, indifferent to the human drama unfolding. You're wrong, he said finally. About the accident, about my motives, about everything. But I understand why you'd think that. Given what my family did to yours, paranoia is probably a survival instinct. He walked toward the barn door, then paused. The lamb needs to nurse within the next hour, or she'll need supplemental feeding. The ewe might reject her if there's too much human scent, so keep handling to a minimum. Emma watched him leave, her certainty wavering despite her determination to maintain it. Either Michael Sterling was an incredible actor, or her cynicism was making her see conspiracies where none existed. The newborn lamb struggled to its feet, instinctively seeking its mother's warmth and nourishment. Emma envied the simplicity of its world, where survival didn't require parsing the motives of someone who might be either salvation or destruction. Outside, she heard Michael making another phone call, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to command. Whatever game he was playing, she was clearly a piece on the board. The question was whether she was a pawn or a player. By mid-morning, the county snowplows had cleared the main highway, but Michael's Mercedes remained buried in the ditch like a metallic gravestone. Emma drove her pickup to the crash site to retrieve whatever personal belongings had survived the wreck. Michael insisted on coming despite her protests about his head injury. The car was worse than she'd remembered. The entire passenger side was crushed against a boulder, driver's side windows blown out by the impact. It was a miracle Michael had walked away alive. Insurance company's going to love this, Michael muttered, climbing carefully down the embankment. Emma watched him examine the wreckage with the detached assessment of someone accustomed to calculating losses. Even covered in snow and twisted metal, the Mercedes probably cost more than most people's annual salary. The casual wealth it represented reminded her exactly who she was dealing with. Michael retrieved a laptop bag from the back seat and his phone charger from the center console. As he reached for a leather portfolio scattered across the driver's side, his phone began buzzing insistently. "Sarah again?" Emma asked. Michael checked the screen and frowned. "No. Unknown number. That's the 5th call from this number since yesterday. Maybe you should answer it. Could be reporters. Daniel might have leaked news about the board meeting." Michael declined the call, but immediately it started ringing again. Persistent bastards. Emma noticed something else buzzing. A faint electronic sound coming from somewhere in the wreckage. "What's that noise?" Michael followed her gaze to the dashboard area. Half buried under snow and broken glass was a small black device, no bigger than a matchbox, blinking with a steady red light. "GPS tracker," Michael said quietly. "Is that standard equipment?" "Not on personal vehicles." Michael's expression darkened as understanding dawned. "Daniel must have had it installed. Corporate security measure for company executives, except I never authorized one for my personal car." Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "How long has it been there?" "Could be months. Years." Michael pulled out his phone and began scrolling through contacts. Which means whoever's been calling already knows exactly where you are." Michael's phone rang again. This time he answered. "Michael Sterling." The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and loud enough for Emma to overhear. "Mr. Sterling, this is David Chun with Sterling Corp Security. We've been trying to reach you since yesterday evening. I've been unavailable. Car accident." "Yes, sir, we're aware. GPS shows your vehicle approximately 20 miles south of Livingston. Mr. Daniel Sterling has requested we confirm your welfare and assist with transportation." Michael's jaw tightened. "I don't need assistance. Sir, with respect, you missed the emergency board meeting this morning. Mr. Daniel is concerned about your condition following the accident. We have a team en route to your location. Cancel them. I'll return to Billings when I'm ready." "I'm afraid that's not possible, sir. The board has voted to place you on medical leave pending a fitness evaluation. Mr. Daniel has legal authority to ensure you receive appropriate care." Emma grabbed Michael's arm, shaking her head vigorously. Michael met her eyes and seemed to understand. "My location is private property. You don't have legal authority to enter without permission." "Sir, we're not looking for confrontation. We simply need to verify your condition and transport you for medical evaluation. The helicopter will arrive within the hour." Michael ended the call and immediately began removing the battery from his phone. "Helicopter?" Emma's voice was tight with alarm. "Daniel's covering all his bases. If I'm declared mentally unfit, he gets emergency control of the company. And if I'm conveniently isolated somewhere receiving medical treatment, he consolidates power while you're unable to fight back." "Exactly." Michael pocketed his disabled phone. "I need to get back to your ranch. Now." They drove back in tense silence, Emma's mind racing through possibilities. A helicopter meant multiple people, probably including medical personnel and lawyers. Once they had Michael, proving he was mentally competent might take days or weeks. More than enough time for Daniel to complete his takeover. "Why didn't you tell me about this last night?" Emma demanded as they pulled into her driveway. "Tell you what, that my brother was planning a corporate coup. You already thought I was manipulating you." "I still think you're manipulating me." Michael turned to face her, his green eyes intense. "Then why are you helping me?" "I don't know." The admission hung between them, loaded with implications neither wanted to examine. Emma killed the engine and sat staring at her hands on the steering wheel. "This morning, in the barn," she said slowly, "you weren't pretending with the animals. That was real." "Yes. And Daniel really has been operating behind your back. For years, apparently. So everything you told me about not knowing about my family's clinic is the truth." Michael's voice was quiet but firm. "Emma, I've made a lot of mistakes running Sterling Corporation. I've been so focused on the big picture that I lost track of the details. But I never authorized the destruction of your family's business." A distant mechanical sound interrupted them, growing louder. "Helicopter rotors. How much time do we have?" Emma asked. Michael checked his watch. "Maybe 10 minutes before they can land and deploy." "And what happens if they take you?" "Daniel wins. Gets the company, gets the Chinese investors, gets everything my grandfather and father built." Emma stared at him, trying to reconcile the vulnerable man beside her with the corporate titan she'd been prepared to hate. Everything about the situation screamed danger. Getting involved in Sterling family politics could destroy the fragile life she'd built in Montana. But the alternative was watching Daniel Sterling complete what he'd started when he destroyed her family's clinic. "I can't trust you," she said finally. "I know. You represent everything I hate about corporate America. I know that too. And I'm probably making the biggest mistake of my life." Michael waited, not pushing, letting her work through the decision herself. "But Daniel Sterling took everything from my family. And I'll be damned if I let him take everything from you too." The helicopter was directly overhead now, circling for a landing site. Michael reached for the truck door, but Emma caught his arm. "Michael!" He turned back, and suddenly they were too close. The truck cab intimate and charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with the approaching confrontation. Emma could see gold flecks in his green eyes, could smell the faint scent of hay and coffee on his clothes. "If we're doing this," she whispered, "if we're really fighting Daniel together, I need to know you won't betray me the way your family did before." "I won't. Promise me." Instead of answering with words, Michael cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. The contact was electric, desperate, full of all the tension and attraction they'd been fighting since the moment she'd pulled him from that wreckage. Emma found herself kissing him back with a fierceness that surprised them both. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, the helicopter had landed in her back pasture. "Now what?" Emma asked. Michael's smile was sharp and dangerous. "Now we give them exactly what they came for." Emma watched through her kitchen window as 3 men in expensive suits climbed out of the helicopter. Daniel Sterling was unmistakable, even from a distance. He shared Michael's height and build, but carried himself with the predatory confidence of someone who'd never had to earn what he possessed. Behind him walked 2 other men, one carrying a medical bag, the other a leather briefcase that screamed corporate lawyer. "Medical team and legal counsel," Michael observed, standing beside her. "Daniel's not taking any chances. What's the plan?" "We give them what they expect." A concerned brother rescuing his mentally unstable sibling. Michael's voice was grim. "But we record everything. Your phone has video capability?" Emma nodded, already pulling out her device. "Keep it hidden, but running. Whatever Daniel says, we need evidence." The knock on her front door was polite but insistent. Emma took a steadying breath and opened it to find Daniel Sterling's practiced smile, the kind that never reached his eyes. "Miss Parker, I presume? I'm Daniel Sterling, Michael's brother. I understand you've been caring for him since his accident." "He's recovering well." "That's wonderful to hear. May we come in? We're here to ensure Michael receives proper medical attention." Emma stepped aside reluctantly. Daniel entered with the casual authority of someone accustomed to having doors opened for him. His companions followed, the doctor immediately focusing on Michael while the lawyer surveyed the room like he was calculating its real estate value. "Michael," Daniel's voice carried just the right note of fraternal concern. "Thank God you're alive. When security called about the GPS tracker going offline during that storm, we feared the worst. Touching concern, considering you were simultaneously orchestrating my removal from the company." Daniel's mask slipped momentarily, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "You missed the emergency board meeting, Michael. The investors were concerned about leadership stability." "I'm sure they were, given what you've been telling them about my mental state." The doctor stepped forward, opening his medical bag. "Mr. Sterling, I'm Dr. Harrison. I need to examine you to assess any neurological damage from the accident." "I'm fine. Sir, you've suffered a significant head trauma. Confusion, paranoia, and erratic decision-making are common symptoms. Your brother is simply concerned about your welfare." Emma watched the exchange, recognizing the careful orchestration. The doctor's words were clinical but designed to build a legal case for Michael's incompetence. The lawyer was recording everything on his phone, probably streaming live to Sterling Corp's board of directors. "Actually," Daniel said, his tone shifting to something more dangerous, "there's another matter we need to discuss. Ms. Parker, I understand you have personal grievances against Sterling Corporation." Emma felt Michael tense beside her. "What are you talking about?" "Parker Veterinary Clinic, Upper West Side, New York. Closed in 2020 due to multiple health code violations and financial irregularities." Daniel's smile turned predatory. "I remember that acquisition personally. Your father was quite resistant to our generous offer. The blood drained from Emma's face. Michael had claimed ignorance about her family's clinic, but Daniel was speaking about it like a personal victory. You remember it personally? Michael's voice was deadly quiet. Of course. It was one of my first major acquisitions for the real estate division. The clinic was perfectly positioned for the luxury development project, but your father was stubborn, Miss Parker. He refused multiple offers, forced us to get creative with building inspections and financial pressure. Emma's hands shook with suppressed rage. You destroyed my family on purpose. I acquired a valuable property for Sterling Corp using standard business practices. The fact that your family chose to fight instead of accepting our generous compensation isn't my responsibility. Michael stepped forward, his face white with fury. You told me that was a routine property acquisition. You said the clinic was already failing. I told you what you needed to hear to sign the authorization papers. You were too busy with your precious merger in Seattle to pay attention to the details. Daniel's mask was completely off now, revealing the ruthless ambition underneath. Just like you were too busy to notice me building relationships with investors, documenting your questionable decisions, positioning myself to save Sterling Corp from your incompetent leadership. Those Chinese investors, the lawyer interjected smoothly, are very concerned about recent erratic behavior patterns. Missing crucial meetings, making unauthorized charity donations, allowing personal relationships to compromise business judgment. Emma realized with growing horror that they were building a case against Michael in real time, using her presence as evidence of his unfitness to lead. This is insane, Michael said. You can't seriously believe the board will accept this manufactured crisis as justification for removing me. The board has already voted, Daniel replied calmly. Emergency medical leave, pending psychological evaluation. Dr. Harrison will be conducting the initial assessment. And if I refuse? Daniel glanced meaningfully at Emma. Then we'll be forced to involve local authorities. Ms. Parker appears to be holding you here against your will, possibly taking advantage of your compromised mental state. Rural law enforcement tends to take kidnapping allegations very seriously. The threat hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Emma understood immediately. Daniel would destroy her life the same way he destroyed her family's clinic, all while using her as evidence against Michael. You bastard, Emma whispered. I'm a businessman protecting my family's interests. Daniel turned back to Michael. The choice is simple, brother. Come with us voluntarily for medical evaluation, sign the emergency powers transfer, and Ms. Parker continues her quiet life with her animals. Or resist, and watch me destroy everything she's built here while the board questions your sanity. Michael looked at Emma, and she saw the moment he made his decision. The same protective instinct that had made him help deliver the lamb that morning was now focused on keeping her safe from his brother's vindictive cruelty. If I sign the papers, you leave Emma alone? Completely alone. She's irrelevant once you're no longer CEO. Emma wanted to scream, to fight, to tell Michael not to sacrifice his life's work for her sake. But she could see in Daniel's cold blue eyes the same calculating malice that had destroyed her family. He would follow through on every threat. Michael, don't, she said quietly. I have to. Michael's voice was filled with resignation and something deeper, something that looked disturbingly like love. I won't let him hurt you the way he hurt your family. Daniel smiled triumphantly and gestured to the lawyer, who immediately produced a tablet loaded with legal documents. A wise decision, brother. Dr. Harrison will make this quick and painless. But as Michael reached for the tablet, Emma noticed something Daniel had overlooked in his moment of victory. Her phone was still recording, and Michael's phone wasn't the only device that had been tracking GPS coordinates. The game wasn't over yet. Michael's hand hovered over the tablet screen, the electronic signature line waiting for the stroke that would transfer control of Sterling Corp to his brother. Around him, the rustic kitchen that had felt like sanctuary hours earlier now resembled a courtroom where his life's work was being dismantled piece by piece. The transfer is effective immediately upon signature, the lawyer explained with professional detachment. Emergency powers include all corporate decisions, board appointments, and international negotiations pending your medical clearance. Emma watched Michael's face, seeing the internal war playing out behind his green eyes. She wanted to tell him to fight, to refuse Daniel's ultimatum, to let her deal with the consequences of his brother's threats. But she also understood what Daniel Sterling was capable of. The man who had systematically destroyed her family's veterinary clinic wouldn't hesitate to obliterate her small sanctuary with equal efficiency. "There's one additional document," Daniel said, producing a second tablet. "A confession acknowledging your awareness of certain irregularities in past acquisitions." Standard corporate protection language. Michael's head snapped up. "What irregularities?" "The Parker Clinic acquisition, for instance. You signed the authorization papers, Michael. Legally, you're responsible for any methods used to secure that property." Emma felt the air leave her lungs. Daniel wasn't just taking Michael's company. He was positioning him to take legal responsibility for the crimes committed against her family. "I never saw the details of that acquisition. But you authorized it. Your signature, your responsibility." Daniel's smile was shark-like. "Unless you'd prefer Ms. Parker file criminal charges against Sterling Corp. While you're undergoing psychological evaluation. I'm sure the district attorney would love to prosecute a mentally unstable CEO for corporate fraud." The trap was perfect. Michael could fight and watch both his company and his freedom disappear while Emma's life was destroyed in the process. Or he could surrender everything and hope Daniel honored his promise to leave her alone. Dr. Harrison cleared his throat impatiently. "Mr. Sterling, these delays are consistent with the cognitive impairment we discussed. The sooner you sign these documents, the sooner you can begin receiving proper treatment." Michael looked at Emma one more time. She saw the exact moment he made his choice, saw love and sacrifice and heartbreak written across his features. He was going to save her, even if it cost him everything. "Don't do this," Emma whispered. "I have to." Michael signed the first document with swift, decisive strokes. The lawyer immediately transmitted it to Sterling Corp's headquarters, where the board would be waiting to rubber-stamp Daniel's emergency appointment as CEO. "Excellent decision, brother." Daniel's voice carried genuine satisfaction. "Dr. Harrison, if you would begin the preliminary evaluation." The doctor opened his medical bag and withdrew a tablet loaded with psychological assessment questions. "Mr. Sterling, I need you to answer these questions honestly. Your responses will determine the appropriate treatment facility." Treatment facility. Emma realized with growing horror that Daniel intended to have Michael institutionalized, removed from society, while the corporate takeover was completed. By the time Michael proved his sanity, Daniel would control everything. "How long?" Michael asked quietly. "The evaluation process typically takes 60 to 90 days, Dr. Harrison replied. "Assuming you cooperate fully with treatment recommendations. 3 months. Long enough for Daniel to cement his control of Sterling Corp., complete the Chinese investor deal, and eliminate any possibility of Michael reclaiming his position." Emma's phone continued recording from her pocket, but she wondered if evidence would matter when Daniel controlled the company's legal resources. He could bury any recording in years of litigation while Michael disappeared into a private psychiatric facility. Michael was halfway through the psychological questionnaire when Daniel's phone rang. He stepped toward the window to take the call, speaking in low, urgent tones. Emma caught fragments of the conversation. Something about timeline acceleration and legal complications. "We need to discuss Ms. Parker's situation," Daniel announced after ending his call. Emma's blood turned to ice. "You said you'd leave me alone if Michael cooperated." "I said I'd leave you alone once Michael was no longer CEO. Unfortunately, my legal team has discovered some concerning information about your sanctuary's operating status." Michael stopped answering questions, his full attention focused on Daniel. "What kind of information?" "It appears the Parker Wildlife Sanctuary has been operating without proper federal licensing for the past 18 months. Fish and Wildlife Service requires specific permits for housing endangered species, which Ms. Parker has been unable to renew due to financial irregularities." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. "That's impossible. My permits are current. According to federal records, your renewal applications have been flagged for investigation. Something about unreported income and questionable funding sources." Daniel's tone was conversational, but his eyes held the same predatory gleam that had destroyed her family's clinic. Federal wildlife violations carry serious criminal penalties. Fines, imprisonment, complete forfeiture of all animals under your care. "You son of a bitch," Michael snarled, starting to rise from his chair. Dr. Harrison placed a restraining hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Sterling, please remain calm. Agitation will only complicate your condition." Those permits were just renewed 6 months ago, Emma said, her voice shaking with rage. I have all the documentation. Paper documentation can be unreliable. Digital federal records are what matter in court. Daniel smiled with false sympathy. Of course, these kinds of administrative errors can sometimes be corrected through appropriate channels. Sterling Corp maintains excellent relationships with several federal agencies. The second trap snapped shut around Emma. Even if Michael signed everything and disappeared into psychiatric treatment, Daniel could still destroy her sanctuary using manufactured federal violations. Her animals would be seized, her property forfeited, her life's work obliterated. What do you want? Emma asked. Nothing unreasonable. A simple statement acknowledging that you may have been confused about Michael's condition following his accident, that perhaps you misunderstood his requests to contact outside parties or resist medical treatment. Emma understood immediately. Daniel wanted her to provide testimony supporting Michael's mental incompetence, giving the psychiatric evaluation additional credibility. You want me to lie about his condition. I want you to acknowledge the reality of traumatic brain injury, confusion, paranoia, inappropriate attachment to caregivers. All documented symptoms that you witnessed firsthand. Michael's hands clenched into fists. Emma, don't listen to him. Don't sacrifice your integrity for this. Her integrity? Daniel laughed coldly. Ms. Parker, your choice is simple. Provide a truthful statement about Michael's compromised mental state, and I'll ensure your federal permit issues are resolved quietly. Refuse, and watch your sanctuary become the subject of a very public federal investigation. Emma stared at Michael, seeing the man who had helped deliver a lamb that morning, who had kissed her with desperate honesty, who was preparing to sacrifice his entire life's work to protect her from his brother's vindictive cruelty. Daniel was asking her to betray everything she'd seen about Michael's character, to provide the final piece of evidence that would destroy him completely. I need time to think, she said. Unfortunately, time is limited. The Chinese investors fly back to Hong Kong tomorrow evening. This transition needs to be completed before their departure. Emma felt the walls closing in around them. Daniel had engineered a perfect storm of legal threats, medical authority, and corporate pressure. Every escape route led to devastating consequences for someone she was rapidly realizing she cared about far more than she'd admitted to herself. Michael met her eyes across the kitchen table, and she saw something there that made her heart clench. Not just resignation or defeat, but a deep, abiding tenderness that spoke of feelings neither of them had had time to explore. Emma, he said quietly, whatever you decide, I understand. Don't destroy your life for mine. The words were meant to give her permission to save herself, but they had the opposite effect. Emma realized with crystalline clarity that she couldn't watch Michael Sterling disappear into some psychiatric facility while his brother dismantled everything he'd worked to build. Not when she was finally seeing the man behind the corporate facade. Not when she was beginning to understand that her family's destruction truly hadn't been his fault. She looked at Daniel Sterling's triumphant expression and made a decision that would either save them both or destroy them together. Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. I think there's something you should know about what I recorded on my phone during this conversation. Daniel's confident expression faltered for the first time since he'd entered Emma's kitchen. What recording? Emma pulled her phone from her pocket, the red recording light still blinking steadily. Everything you've said for the past 20 minutes. Your admission about destroying my family's clinic on purpose. Your threats against Michael. Your plans to manufacture federal violations against my sanctuary. The lawyer stepped forward immediately. Ms. Parker, you're required to inform us if you're recording this conversation. Depending on Montana state law, that recording may be inadmissible in court. Montana is a one-party consent state, Emma replied coolly. I don't need anyone's permission to record conversations on my own property. Michael's eyes lit up with understanding. Daniel, you just confessed to orchestrating the Parker Clinic acquisition using fraudulent building inspections. On tape. Alleged confession, the lawyer corrected quickly. Mr. Daniel Sterling was simply explaining standard business practices that you authorized, Mr. Michael Sterling. As CEO, you bear legal responsibility for all corporate acquisitions. But Daniel wasn't listening to his legal counsel. His calculating mind was already working through the implications of Emma's recording. Give me the phone. No. Ms. Parker, You're interfering with a legitimate medical intervention. Dr. Harrison, please note that the patient's caregiver is displaying hostile and paranoid behavior that may be influencing his psychological state. Dr. Harrison dutifully made notes on his tablet. Documented. This level of resistance suggests possible Stockholm Syndrome or trauma bonding between patient and caregiver. Emma felt the familiar sensation of powerful men reshaping reality to serve their purposes. Just like when the building inspectors had found violations that didn't exist, they were manufacturing a medical emergency that justified taking whatever they wanted. You know what? Michael said quietly, standing up from the table. I think I'd like to speak with my attorney before signing anything else. You've already signed the emergency transfer documents, the lawyer pointed out. The corporate transition is legally binding, but the psychological evaluation isn't, and neither is Emma's statement about my mental condition. Michael moved to stand beside Emma, presenting a united front. I'm withdrawing consent for medical treatment. Dr. Harrison looked uncomfortable for the first time. Mr. Sterling, I strongly advise against that course of action. Head trauma can cause delayed symptoms that justify involuntary commitment. Michael's voice carried sharp intelligence that contradicted every word of Daniel's narrative about his mental instability. No thank you, doctor. I'll take my chances with delayed symptoms. Daniel's mask slipped completely, revealing cold fury underneath. You're making a serious mistake, Michael. Both of you. The only mistake I made was trusting you with important business decisions for the past 5 years. Michael's voice grew stronger as his anger crystallized. How many other families did you destroy while I was focused on legitimate business? How many other properties did you acquire using forged inspections and fraudulent reports? Prove it. The 2 words hung in the air like a challenge. Daniel was right, and everyone in the room knew it. Emma's recording captured his admissions, but a skilled legal team could argue entrapment, emotional distress, or medical confusion. They needed more than one conversation to bring down someone with Daniel's resources. We will, Emma said. Daniel laughed. With what? You have no access to Sterling Corp records, no legal standing to investigate our business practices, and no credibility once news breaks about your federal permit violations. But I know someone who might have what we need, Emma continued, her mind racing. Robert Chun, the lawyer who helped my family relocate to Montana after you destroyed our clinic. Michael turned to look at her. What about him? He always said he kept insurance policies in case Sterling Corp ever tried to cause more trouble for us. I thought he meant financial records, but what if he meant something else? Daniel's face went pale. Robert Chin retired years ago, moved to some cabin in the middle of nowhere. Glacier National Park, Emma said. About 2 hours from here. The lawyer stepped forward urgently. Mr. Daniel Sterling, I strongly recommend we conclude this business immediately and return to Billings. Extended delays could complicate the board's confidence in the transition. But Daniel was staring at Emma with the focused intensity of a predator recognizing a genuine threat. What exactly did this lawyer tell you he was keeping? He said Sterling Corp had made a lot of enemies over the years, and that someday people would want proof of what you'd done to them. Emma met Daniel's gaze steadily. He said he always recorded his phone calls with corporate executives. Old habit from practicing criminal defense law. The silence that followed was deafening. If Robert Chin had recorded phone calls with Daniel during the Parker Clinic acquisition, those recordings would contain evidence of conspiracy, fraud, and possibly other crimes. Michael broke the silence. We need to go to Glacier Park. Now. You're not going anywhere, Daniel said sharply. Dr. Harrison, I think Mr. Sterling's agitation level requires immediate sedation. The doctor reached into his medical bag, but Michael was already moving. Emma, car keys. Now. Emma tossed him her truck keys without hesitation. Daniel lunged for them, but Michael was faster, his reflexes sharp despite the head injury. The 2 brothers collided in the middle of Emma's kitchen, expensive suits and mountain practicality clashing in a tangle of limbs and fury. Stop them, Daniel shouted to his companions while grappling with Michael. The lawyer moved to help, but Emma stepped into his path. This is still my property. You want to physically assault the homeowner too? Dr. Harrison hung back, clearly uncomfortable with the situation's rapid deterioration from medical intervention to physical confrontation. Michael broke free from Daniel's grip and backed toward the door, breathing hard but steady. "Emma, let's go." "You'll never make it to Chen's cabin," Daniel called after them. "I'll have state police intercept you before you reach the park entrance." "On what charges?" "Kidnapping, medical emergency, interference with federal wildlife investigations." Daniel's voice followed them as they reached the door. "I have enough legal firepower to bury you both while we sort out the truth." Emma paused at the threshold, looking back at the man who had destroyed her family's life and was now trying to destroy Michael's. "Mr. Sterling, you made one crucial mistake." "What's that?" "You underestimated how much damage two people can do when they have nothing left to lose." They ran for Emma's truck, leaving Daniel and his team behind in the kitchen. As they peeled out of the driveway, Emma saw Daniel already on his phone, probably calling in whatever resources Sterling Corp had to stop them. "How long to reach Robert Chun?" Michael asked, taking the winding mountain road faster than was probably safe. 2 hours if we take the main highways. But if Daniel calls in law enforcement? Back roads? 3 hours, maybe 4. But they'll be harder to track. Michael made the decision without hesitation, turning onto a narrow Forest Service road that would take them deep into the Montana wilderness. Behind them, the helicopter was already lifting off from Emma's property. "Michael," Emma said as they bounced along the rutted dirt road, "what if Robert doesn't have anything useful? What if we're risking everything for recordings that don't exist?" Michael glanced at her, his expression grim but determined. "Then we'll figure out another way. But I'm not letting Daniel destroy you the way he destroyed your family. And I'm not letting him steal Sterling Corp while I'm locked up in some psychiatric facility." Emma felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that went deeper than attraction or shared danger. The man beside her was fighting for her with the same fierce protectiveness she felt for her rescued animals. Whatever happened when they reached Robert Chen's cabin, she knew she was falling in love with Michael Sterling. The question was whether they'd survive long enough to explore those feelings, or whether Daniel's resources would catch up to them before they could expose the truth. In the distance, Emma could hear the faint sound of helicopter rotors, searching the mountain roads for two fugitives who had just declared war on one of Montana's most powerful corporations. The cabin sat nestled against towering pines near Glacier National Park's southern boundary, so remote that Emma's GPS lost signal 2 miles before they reached it. Robert Chun answered the door wearing flannel and suspicion, his weathered face breaking into surprise when he recognized Emma. "Emma Parker, I haven't seen you since your family left New York." Robert's gaze shifted to Michael, taking in the expensive clothes and obvious head injury. "And you brought a Sterling with you." "Robert, we need your help. It's about Daniel Sterling and what he did to my family's clinic." Robert stepped aside to let them enter the sparse but comfortable cabin. Books lined every wall, and a wood-burning stove provided warmth against the mountain chill. "I figured one of you would show up eventually," Robert said, settling into a worn leather chair. "Daniel Sterling made a lot of enemies over the years. Sooner or later, someone was bound to want proof." Michael leaned forward. "You have proof?" "Son, I spent 30 years practicing criminal defense law before I helped families like the Parkers. First thing you learn is that criminals always brag about their crimes to someone. They can't help themselves." Robert disappeared into a back room and returned with a locked metal box. Inside were dozens of digital recordings, each labeled with dates and names. "Daniel Sterling called me personally during the Parker acquisition," Robert continued, selecting a specific device. "Wanted to know if the family had any legal recourse after the building inspections found violations. I told him the Parkers were clean, that any violations would have to be manufactured." Robert pressed play. Daniel's voice filled the cabin, younger but unmistakably arrogant. "Manufacturing violations isn't the problem, Chun. The problem is making sure they stick long enough to force the sale. How long can you drag out an appeal process?" Robert's voice responded, "Mr. Sterling, I cannot and will not advise you on creating fraudulent building violations." "Of course not. I'm simply asking hypothetical questions about appeal timelines. Hypothetically, if someone wanted to pressure a small business owner into selling, how would the appeals process work?" Emma felt tears sting her eyes as she listened to the casual discussion of her family's destruction. Michael's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "There's more," Robert said grimly. He played another recording, this one more recent. "Chun, it's Daniel Sterling. I need you to forget we ever discussed the Parker situation. My brother's getting suspicious about some of our real estate acquisitions. Mr. Sterling, I keep detailed records of all my conversations with clients. Then I suggest you lose those records. Sterling Corp has significant resources for protecting our interests, and I'd hate to see your quiet retirement disrupted by unnecessary legal complications. Michael's face had gone white with rage. When was this recorded? 6 months ago, right around the time your brother started making moves against your position as CEO. Robert produced more recordings. Daniel discussing forged environmental reports for a shopping center acquisition. Daniel bragging about bribing building inspectors in 3 different states. Daniel outlining his plan to systematically undermine Michael's authority while building relationships with international investors. He's been planning this takeover for at least 2 years, Robert concluded. Every acquisition, every business decision, every relationship he built was designed to position himself as your replacement. Michael stood and began pacing the small cabin. We need to get this evidence to the Sterling Corp board immediately. You think they'll listen? Emma asked. Daniel has legal control now. Not if we can prove he obtained that control through fraud and conspiracy. Michael pulled out his disabled phone. Robert, do you have internet access here? Satellite connection. Slow but functional. Michael powered up his phone and immediately began making calls. His first was to Sarah, his assistant. Sarah, it's Michael. I need you to contact every board member immediately. Emergency meeting in 2 hours. I don't care what Daniel authorized. I'm still a major shareholder. Tell them I have evidence of corporate fraud that could destroy the company if it's not addressed immediately. His second call was to Sterling Corp's chief legal counsel. Jim, it's Michael Sterling. I need you to file emergency injunctions against any corporate decisions made in the past 24 hours. Because I have evidence that Daniel obtained control through fraudulent means. No, I'm not having a breakdown. I'm about to save the company from the biggest scandal in its history. While Michael coordinated the corporate response, Emma uploaded Robert's recordings to a secure cloud server and sent copies to every major news outlet in Montana. Daniel might control Sterling Corp's legal resources, but he couldn't suppress evidence that was already in the public domain. Within an hour, Michael's phone was ringing constantly. Board members, lawyers, investors, and reporters all demanding explanations. The Chinese investors, spooked by rumors of fraud investigations, postponed their return flights and demanded emergency meetings with Sterling Corp's legal team. The board's calling another emergency session, Michael announced after his latest call. This time with all the evidence on the table. They drove back toward Billings in Emma's truck, the recordings playing through the speakers like an audio indictment of Daniel Sterling's crimes. Each revelation made Michael's jaw tighter and Emma's sense of vindication stronger. What happens to Daniel now? Emma asked. Federal fraud charges, probably. Wire fraud, conspiracy, securities violations. He'll spend the next decade in court if he's lucky, and the next decade in federal prison if he's not. And Sterling Corp? Survives. Barely. We'll have to restructure completely, implement new oversight procedures, probably face a shareholder lawsuit or 2. But we'll survive. They reached Billings just as the sun was setting behind the mountains. Sterling Corp's headquarters buzzed with activity, board members arriving for the emergency session, reporters gathering on the sidewalk, federal investigators beginning what would become a months-long examination of the company's real estate practices. Michael paused before entering the building, looking at Emma with an expression that mixed exhaustion, gratitude, and something deeper. I couldn't have done this without you, he said. You saved my sanctuary. I saved your company. I'd say we're even. Emma. Michael's voice carried a weight that made her look up at him. What happens now? After the legal hearings and federal investigations and corporate restructuring? Emma had been asking herself the same question during the drive back to Billings. Her life in Montana was simple, focused, built around caring for animals that couldn't care for themselves. Michael's life was complex, demanding, centered on a corporate empire that required constant attention. I don't know, she admitted, because I know what I want to happen. Michael stepped closer, his hands framing her face the way they had during their first kiss in the truck cab that felt like a lifetime ago. I want to rebuild Sterling Corp into something my grandfather would be proud of, a company that creates value instead of destroying it. I want to fund wildlife sanctuaries across the country, including yours. I want to make sure families like yours never get destroyed by corporate greed again. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. That sounds like a good plan, and I want to do all of that with you, as my partner, in business and in life. The proposal hung between them, loaded with possibility and promise. Emma thought about the man who had helped deliver a lamb, who had sacrificed his company to protect her, who was now offering to reshape his entire life around values they shared. Michael Sterling, she said slowly, are you asking me to marry you in the parking lot of your corporate headquarters? I'm asking you to marry me anywhere you'll say yes. Emma kissed him instead of answering with words, pouring 5 years of grief and hope and new love into the contact. When they broke apart, both were crying. Yes, she whispered against his lips. Yes to all of it. 6 months later, they were married at the Parker Wildlife Sanctuary, surrounded by rescued animals and the Montana mountains that had brought them together. Daniel Sterling was beginning a 15-year federal prison sentence. Sterling Corp had been restructured as a sustainable development corporation with Emma as director of environmental conservation. The Parker Veterinary Clinic had been rebuilt in downtown Livingston, serving rural Montana with the same dedication her family had brought to New York. Emma split her time between the clinic, the expanded sanctuary, and traveling with Michael as they built a network of conservation partnerships across the American West. On their wedding night, as they sat on the porch of the cabin Michael had built overlooking the sanctuary, Emma reflected on the chain of events that had brought them together. A storm, an accident, and a moment of compassion had transformed 2 broken lives into something stronger than either could have achieved alone. Any regrets? Michael asked, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the rescued animals settle in for the night. Emma considered the question seriously. Her family's clinic was rebuilt. Daniel Sterling's victims had received justice. The sanctuary was thriving under Sterling Corp's protection, and she had found a love that felt as natural and necessary as breathing. Just one, she said finally. Michael tensed. What's that? I regret that it took a blizzard and a car accident for us to find each other. We could have been doing this work together for years. Michael relaxed and pulled her closer. Then we'll just have to make up for lost time. In the distance, a wolf howled at the rising moon, calling to its pack across the Montana wilderness. Emma smiled and settled deeper into Michael's embrace, knowing she had finally found her own pack, her own place in the world where love and purpose aligned perfectly. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and patient, witnesses to another story of love conquering everything that tried to destroy it.